Welcome to this IUN Community Garden Session, Gardening for the Birds. I'm Leslie Kaiser, CURE's moderator for this session, and the presenter for today is Susan Radovich. Susan, a dental hygienist by trade, has been a master gardener volunteer since 2005. In this volunteer role, she has served on numerous committees. Currently, Susan is most actively engaged as a public speaker through the Lake County Purdue Extension Speakers Bureau and as a mentor on landscaping to first-time homeowners through the Lake County Master Gardeners Association Habitat for Humanity Partnership. Susan, thank you for joining us today.
It is my pleasure. We're talking about adding birds and attracting them to our yard. Attracting birds involves more than putting out a bird bath or a feeder. Bird feeders are fine, but they benefit specific species only, and only when they're really kept full. While we're talking about bird feeders, I would like to also tell you that you need to make sure you take them down regularly and clean them very well, because otherwise they can harbor diseases. If you will remember, a year or two ago, they asked us to please remove all of our bird feeders and our bird baths because they had a disease going around. I was quite concerned after I took mine down, because when I put them back up, I found I didn't have as many birds as I used to have. I notice now they are starting to come back, and I am getting a lot more birds. So if you've been shy on birds, don't panic. It's going to move quite readily along as it is. Next slide. Birds require specific habitats. They need open meadows, shrubby areas, and forests. And one of the main reasons they need that is they need the cover. Next slide. Habitat loss is the greatest threat to land birds. For example, the forests that are divided by the highways or the power lines allow predators like the grackles and the blue jays access to the eggs and the chicks of the forest interior birds. A lot of times we call blue jays the yard boss because they come in and they get rather bossy and take over. Next slide. Creating a bird habitat in your own yard will help, and will be especially helpful if your neighbors follow your lead. I don't know if you recognize this photo or not, but this was taken up at Lurie Gardens up in Chicago. So even in a very urban setting, you can have lots of different flowers and foliage and things, even though you might tend to think of it as more of a concrete jungle. My good friend Diane Fruth is the one who actually prepared this particular program a number of years ago, and her husband John is an avid photographer. So he has taken most, if not all, of the pictures that you will see in this program. Diane had since moved to Florida and asked me to please continue presenting her program for her. The next slide. Birds and plants have evolved side by side. The birds eat the fruit and nectar, pollinating the plants and dispersing the seed. Next slide. As the seeds pass through the bird's digestive tract, they remain intact. That means they're whole, and the seed's coat is scarified or scratched, improving the chances of germination. If you're planting seeds yourself outside even, a lot of times with the seeds, we will find that we have to actually scratch the seed coating to allow it to germinate more correctly. The birds kind of take care of doing that for us, which I think is a very cool way to have that happen. Bird excrement is also high in natural fertilizer, so that's nitrogen. Next slide. Plants have evolved in ways that assure the appeal of their fruits to birds. Most trees and shrubs have small fruit. It's no more than 3/5 of an inch in diameter, so it's just the right size of a bird's gaping bill. Next slide. Many fruits ripen when bird migration hits its peak, or the young are just searching for their first meals. Now, the majority of plants that depend on birds to distribute their seeds produce very brightly colored fruits. Next slide. Plants usually put on their fruit display at the same time that they are producing sugars or the fatty lipids. These are the nutrients that serve no purpose for the plant, but they do attract flocks of seed dispersing birds. And you'll see the various different types of birds, which I will talk about later here, and they are perched on the branches eating the seeds. Next slide. Brightly colored fruit is a magnet for fruit-eating birds such as thrushes and the catbirds. Next slide. Plant fruits ripen in different seasons. And it's very helpful to have a variety of plants so that you will have fruit that ripens all seasons long so that you can continue to attract the birds. The next slide. In the spring and summer, we have the sweet fruits such as your service berries, wild cherries, mulberries, and strawberries. Next slide. The timing of the fruit. We'll talk about the fall, which is where we are right now. The migrants, such as the thrushes, the tanagers, the warblers, require fatty fruits to fuel their migration. And a few of their favorite plants include spicebush, magnolia, and flowering dogwood. When I'm talking about flowering dogwood, and I think I'll be talking about that again later in this program, there are several different kinds of dogwoods, and you need to know that there are dogwood trees, there are dogwood bushes, there are several kinds of dogwood bushes, and some of the ones are very beautiful, some attract birds more than others. So you're going to want to use botanical names when you're shopping for those. The next slide. Timing of fruit in the winter. Fruits of the mountain ash, the hawthorn, and the viburnum have a very low lipid content, making them less desirable as fall migrants, so they aren't eaten. But it also keeps them less likely to turn rancid and rot on the plants. And these fruits are especially important when late snowfalls prevent returning the migrants from finding insects and worms. And to give you an idea how much the birds will come after those, when I plant my planters for the winter, my planters that are outside, which are the ones that won't break. Clay, you cannot leave clay ones outside all winter where we live. They will break, but I have concrete planters and so forth. I plant them with lots of evergreens over the winter that I've clipped from different bushes, stuff them in, put in lots of different branches. I put in colorful berries and so forth. I have seen them come and literally strip the winter berries right off of my branches that are in there. I've also seen that I've put in some artificial berries sometimes to give it bigger, bolder, more color, and they will come and try to eat the artificial berries off before they realize that they are not real. So you will find that they are very much attracted to the berries. And if you don't have these bushes in your yard, you can put together some large planters and plant them in that way so that they will decorate your yard for the holidays. I leave them up all winter long. I decorate it before Christmas, and I don't take them down until it's time to put the forsythia and so forth in my planters. The next slide, please. The natives. Plant natives and avoid invasive plants. Native plants are more likely to provide a mix of food of the right size and nutrition and at the right time of the year. If you don't recognize these are flowering dogwood trees. 12 ways to design a bird-friendly garden. And by the way, if you keep hearing this thump in the background, I have an interesting situation going on right now. It's been going on for a couple days. I have a woodpecker who is perched on my gutter outside, and he keeps rapping on my window with his bill. I'm not quite sure why he wants to rap on the window, but he's decided that's fun. You're going to recreate layers of plant growth. Canopy trees in the forest create an understory for smaller trees and shrubs such as spicebush. Vines like Virginia creeper provide cover and food. The next slide. Select plants with fruits that ripen at different times. In the spring, the parent birds will get their energy from foods like blackberries and wild cherries. In the fall, your migrant birds require fatty fruits such as flowering dogwood or spicebush. And in the winter, the birds need persistent fruits such as conifers, hawthorns, crabapples, and sumacs. The next slide, yes. Plant small trees and shrubs in clumps. The clumps provide highly visible mass displays of fruits. Go for a natural look. And this is anything that you're planting in your yard, whether it be trees, shrubs, your flowers, anything that you're planting. Avoid the rows and plant in masses. Birds, butterflies, anything like that are much more attracted to a clump of plants because it's a high concentration of form and color, and it will draw them in as opposed to, say, a single plant somewhere. And it gives you a much more natural look. And the other thing is you want to plant in odd numbers. For some reason, the eye really likes seeing odd numbers. So if you're planting your plants, you put in 1, 3, 5, 7, as opposed to an even number. Now, I will say there's an exception to that. If you're planting on opposite sides of the sidewalk and you want a symmetrical look in your house, you can put one on the left of the sidewalk and one on the right. Your eye will still read it as an odd number because it's not two of them just side by side. but that's a planting help that will make it look more natural and more appealing, not only to humans, but to your critters that you're trying to attract to your yard, such as the butterflies and the birds. Plant at least, next slide, please. Plant at least one clump of conifers. Conifers provide shelter during storms and winter weather. They also provide roosting and nesting sites. And one of the things that we often tell people is if you do not have a lot of conifers around your yard and you want to provide shelter, if you have a live Christmas tree at your house and you no longer need it at the end of the season, take it outside and put it in your yard and leave it there until springtime. If you don't mind looking at it, you can put it in a pot or you can lay it on the ground or whatever. And a lot of times the birds will hide in that and use that as giving them a little bit more warmth and protection. The next slide. You can also spare a dead tree. Birds like to perch in the dead trees. Woodpeckers will use them for nesting and drumming. And that is what my woodpecker outside is doing right now. He's drumming on my window. I'm not quite sure why he's finding it appealing, but they often do. They don't necessarily have to have a tree. They will find something to drum on. The next slide. Plant vines. Virginia creeper and wild grape provide perches, nesting places, and insects for birds. One of the things you are going to want to watch, though, is how invasive or fast growing a vine is. A number of years ago, I had an arborist out here to trim my trees, and I had planted a cutting that I had gotten from Diane Fruit, the same one who prepared this program, and it was of a climbing hydrangea. And he finally suggested that I should take it out. It had been there 5 years. It was getting quite woody, and he said he has actually seen those scale and overcome a complete tree to where you could hardly see the tree and it choked it out. And my very large oaks that I have, there is no way I would be able to get to the top and prune those out. So you might want to check on that. Another vine that you're going to see that will often scale and has very pretty color is poison ivy. So make sure you know what you're looking at before you start pulling it off. We wouldn't want anyone to get poison ivy accidentally. The next slide, please. You want to limit your lawn size. Lawns provide foraging space for the robins. They love to go through your yard and look for the worms, but they limit the food sources for other birds. So if you could have less yard and more plants, for example, these are coneflowers and other various flowers that are in the background, you will have more luck attracting a bigger variety of the birds. On the coneflowers here, you see those seedy heads up there. They like to eat those. Those are thistle seeds, and they will enjoy eating those very much. So when the flowers have died out, leave them when they're brown and looking. Don't take them off until the birds have eaten all the seeds. Avoid invasive non-native species. Invasive species can invade your natural areas, and the problem with those is they crowd out your native plants, which is what the birds are going to be more attracted to. Water sources. Birds need your water to drink and to cool themselves. Clean your bird baths often. You can also provide a mister. You see a mister in the front, the top left corner. There's a cascading fountain on the right. Down at the bottom where you see the two cardinals that are in there, if you look closely, there's a wire cord that runs down. That is a heater. And if you can provide a bird bath with a heater, they will be very happy with that. Her slide says they need to cool themselves, but even more important, in the winter, they need the water to stay warm because their feathers, they get in and they take a bath. And if you notice, they flip all around and they're flipping water everywhere. They need to clean their feathers so they can fluff their feathers. And when they fluff their feathers, that allows them the warmth they need. So it's really important to provide some water for the birds as well. Provide nest boxes. In all, 48 species are known to use nest boxes. The size of the box and the size of the entrance hole are important. If you're wanting a small bird like this, if you make too large of a hole, predators will get in and take over. You're going to look for a sloping roof, drainage holes, an access door, which if you look on the bottom of this, down in the slanted side, you can see the little hinge and you can open it up, clean it out, and then close it back up again. And a predator guard, which is to keep the raccoons and the squirrels out. These are very simple boxes that you can construct. When I was a Cub Scout leader back when our son was in Cub Scouts, I went in with a couple other moms and we had the entire den construct birdhouses like this. Each child make one to take home with them. And we were able to do it in one afternoon. Once you have the wood cut, they assemble quite easily. And the kids really do enjoy a project like that. The next slide. Don't be so quick to clean up all of your leaf litter when you're cleaning up around your house this fall. For example, rake leaves 5 or 6 inches thick and leave them under the hedges or the trees. By spring, they will have decomposed and they will attract earthworms and insects. The other advantage by leaving some of the leaf litter is it will help insulate your plants so that the ground stays an even temperature. A lot of times what we have a problem with the bushes and things is particularly when it gets hot, cold, hot, cold. It's not so much the cold that's killing your plants as when it turns hot and cold, if the ground is freezing and thawing, because then the plants start to heave out of the ground. We want to keep the soil more of a constant temperature. So if you can rake a bunch of the leaves in underneath your bushes, leave them there until spring, and then what hasn't decomposed, you can rake back out again and chop them up finer and dispose of them come spring. That would be helpful not only for the birds, but also for your plants. Use your pesticides sparingly. Pesticides will kill insects needed by the birds, and it may harm the birds. We have a saying that you always start with the most minimal way of doing things. If you can pick the bugs off, fine. The next step would be to try spraying them with a garden hose and just try to wash your plants off that way. If you're still having troubles with insects on there that are devouring your leaves, use a soapy water. Just a little couple drops of Dawn, mix in a bucket of soapy water, wash your plants down with that. If that fails, then you can go on to an insecticidal soap and you work your way up the chain until you find, I've done enough, I've managed to control the problem. Keep in mind, you're going to have to expect some damage to your plants if you want to have the beneficial birds and insects, or birds and butterflies around, because they do rely on some of the insects that are there. You kill all the insects, we've killed their source of nutrition. So you are going to have to be a little tolerant of some damage of your plants. Let's talk about some good plants for the Midwest. And again, this is another picture from Lurie Gardens up at Millennial Park up in Chicago. Service berries. If you notice, these are, I'm going to give you the common name at the top. Underneath it, we have the Latin name for them. The fruits are eaten by more than 30 species of birds. They have flowers that bloom in the spring and fruits that ripen in early summer. You can plant these in shade to full sun, so it's a very versatile plant. Hackberry. It's a good yard tree that provides late season fruit for many birds as well as nesting sites. It's adapted to a wide range of soils, and it does have winter persistent fruits. Rough-leaved dogwood. Now this is a thicket-forming shrub or a small spreading tree. They have small yellowish flowers. They turn into white berry-like fruit. There are more than 40 species of birds that can eat the fruit, including the cardinals, the robins, the bluebirds, and the catbirds. These are not to be confused with your dogwood trees that we looked at earlier that have the purpley pink flowers on them. They're also not to be confused with just your straight up red twig dogwood bushes. There are a few varieties in this Cornus family. This is a Drummondii, and these are very good with the berries. There are a number of good plants that are out there, but be aware that there are several different types so that you're not confused. Let's talk about coneflower, also known as your echinacea. These are drought resistant. The seeds are attractive to goldfinches, pine siskin. These are the ones that I talked about earlier, that they have the seed heads up at the top that you get the thistle seed out of. Then we have gay feather or liatris. It is hardy, zones 3 to 8. It will attract a lot of bees. You will see bees around it, but it also helps attract the birds. Eastern red cedar. A lot of you will be decorating with some of this during the Christmas holidays. It's the green evergreen that has the beautiful blue berries on them, and people buy them, and I get cut ones at the different landscapers and put them into my planters over the winter, and they look really pretty, and they do help with the birds. They provide nest sites. They have fruit, insects, winter cover, lots of species available. The berry-like fruits are at first whitish, and then they turn a beautiful blue. They're eaten by over 30 species, including the bluebird, the cedar waxwing, and the robin. There's many oaks in the oak family. Bur oak has this type of a shape of leaf. The birds use it for cover. nest sites, acorns, and insects. It tolerates a wide range of soils and moisture conditions. It prefers deep, moist, well-drained soil, and nearly 100 wildlife species use this tree. You also have the chinkapin oaks. Again, you'll see, even though it's in the oak family, the leaves are just a little bit different, a little bit more of a sawtooth edge on them. It's a medium-sized tree that tolerates dry conditions. So whether you have very wet soil, you have very dry soil, whatever, and you'll find oak trees tend to like to live in a family or a community too. So you may have several oak trees. My property that I built my house on is only half acre. We saved as many of the trees as we could. We have thinned some over the years, but I have 17 oak trees on my property in the front and side yard. And I will tell you, it brings in a lot of the birds. It brings in the squirrels. The acorns are dropping. And actually, it also attracts a lot of deer. One day I looked out and I had 8 deer standing in my yard, even though I live in a gated subdivision with near a golf course. So I'm not out in the country, but we have a lot of deer. And I thought, oh my goodness, my plants are going to be gone tomorrow. They're out there eating everything. I went out and they had not eaten my hydrangeas, which they usually do. They had not eaten the hostas, which they usually do. They were eating acorns. It turns out acorns are something that deer really enjoy as a delicacy. Smooth sumac. Many birds seek out sumac thickets for nest sites and cover, and they consume the fruits in the winter. Let's talk about some of our favorite backyard birds. The northern cardinal. Its habitat is sheltered backyards, woodland edges. It really likes seeds and insects. Some favorites are sunflower seeds and cracked corn. I've found these to be ground or platform feeders. With my hanging bird feeders, they do not hang on my hanging bird feeders. They will stand underneath them and eat off of there. If you have a platform feeder, they really like those too. I don't have platform feeders because I cannot keep the squirrels out of them. We're draining my seed feeders daily. So I have the kind that you hang on to, and then as the weight of a bird gets on it, it pulls it down, the cage down and locks it. So the main thing is the very heavy birds, it doesn't access, but more importantly, the squirrels get on it and they can't have access to it. But I find that I have plenty of cardinals. They flit in and out of the yard regularly, cleaning up the seeds that are on the ground underneath it. Blue jays, their habitat is the backyards, the parks, and the woodlands. They're omnivorous, including nuts, seeds, fruits, insects, and frogs. Their favorites are suet, sunflower seeds, and peanuts. They do hang on my suet cages regularly, and they don't seem to have a problem clipping onto that, and their beak is a little bit more pointed than the cardinals are, so they can get in through the little wires. The white-breasted nuthatch. The habitat is areas with plentiful trees. Their diets are insects and larvae, pine, fir and maple seeds, juniper berries, oak, beech, and hickory nuts. The feeder favorites are sunflower seeds, unsalted peanuts, birdseed mix, and suet. You probably see that we have kind of a trend going here. Most of these love their sunflower seeds, they love their birdseed mix, and they do like the suet. But sunflower seeds are always a big hit. You have 2 choices with sunflower seeds. You can buy shelled or unshelled. You will pay more money for the unshelled ones, but they make a lot less mess. We've used both kinds. I will tell you at the end of the season, if I've used the kinds that are in the shells, I will have to get a snow shovel and clean up several shovelfuls of the shells from underneath my plants when I'm done. The downy woodpecker. His habitat is open wooded area, including parks and backyards. Their diet is insects, caterpillars, berries, and nuts. Their favorites are suet and peanut butter. There are several kinds of woodpeckers. I have 3 different types that come to my yard. The downy woodpecker is one of them. A fun project that you can do with your kids if you're looking for something to do over the winter, take some pine cones, spread them with some peanut butter, and then roll them in birdseed and hang those from the trees outside. I do that with like my little granddaughter, and she thinks it's lots of fun. And then we watch all the birds come and pick the seeds off of that. So that might be something you would enjoy doing. American robin. The habitat is yards, fields, farms, and woods. Their diet is earthworms. They also eat insects, berries, and seeds. Feeder favorites are fresh fruit, raisins, hulled sunflower seeds, and they also like peanut butter. Most people tend to think that robins disappear and migrate over the winter because we don't usually see them that much. They do not really migrate. They just kind of hide out somewhere. And on a warmer day, you will see them out and about a lot more. Um, so I do try to keep a steady um, fill of things that they will eat as well. With the robins, another thing that I do, I told you I plant the planters at our house for the winter. I put in the evergreens and I put in sticks and large pine cones and so forth. I have some window boxes that are up under the eave. I also have 2 half-round concrete planters that are hanging on my brick wall that are planted also under the eave. So they're kind of protected. Predators can't get to them. They're shaded, whatever. Every single year, I have had robins make a nest in there and raise their young in them as we get to late fall, or excuse me, late winter going into spring. So it's a little bit of a drawback because I can't pull out the deadish looking evergreens as quickly as I'd like to put in the spring flowers, but it's well worth it to be able to watch the babies hatch out and so forth. So you might find that another attraction, that you can get more baby birds to your house if you're doing that. The oriole. The habitat is deciduous woodlands, parks, and suburbs. Their diet is mostly insects and berries. Feeder favorites include sugar water, halved oranges, nailed to posts, and grape jelly. Orioles are only here as they migrate through. We don't keep them all year long. They come early in the spring as they're headed north to Michigan, and then they have just passed through again now. We have friends who have a cottage about halfway up in Michigan, and they have them all season long there. But we have a very brief period here where the orioles are here. The black-capped chickadee. I love these little guys. They're at my house almost all winter. Wooded suburbs and open woodlands. Their diet is insects, berries, and seeds. Feeder favorites are the sunflower seeds, suet, and thistle, and they're just happy-looking little critters. The cedar waxwing. I have not had any luck attracting these to my yard. I'd be interested to know if any of you have. The habitat is backyards, parks, and open woodlands. Their diet is fruit, tree sap, flower petals, and insects. Backyard favorites. The berry producing trees and shrubs like the firethorn, highbush, cranberry, and mulberry. The eastern bluebird. Their habitat is open backyards and farmlands. Their diet is insects and berries, and they really like live mealworms. I do not use live mealworms, but you can buy dried mealworms and put those out, and I have found that very much attracts the birds. I have a hanging dish that I put them in from the tree or from a shepherd's hook, and they will come and enjoy using that. The American goldfinch. It likes open areas like yards, fields, and fence rows. Its diet is seeds and berries, and their favorites are thistle seeds, which again, I told you you can get from your echinacea coneflowers. Your house wren. There are plentiful. You'll find these everywhere. They're in the backyards, the parks, and the open woods. Their diet is insects. Their backyard favorites are bird houses with a 1 1/8 inch entrance holes. Indigo bunting. They like the overgrown fields, the orchards, thickets, and open spaces near woods. Their diet is seeds, insects, grains, and berries. Feeder favorites are thistles on the ground or in tube feeders, and they do like bird baths. The scarlet tanager. The habitat is trees and shrubs along gardens and parks. Their diet, it forages in trees for seeds, insects, and fruits. The feeder favorites may come to feeders for the sunflowers and the safflower seeds. The tufted titmouse. Its habitat is trees and shrubs along gardens and parks. It likes to forage in the trees for seeds, insects, and fruit. And again, favorites sunflower and safflower seeds. The red-headed woodpecker. This is a different type of a woodpecker. The habitat is open woodlands, seeks out areas free of underbrush. It likes insects, berries, and nuts. And their favorites are cracked sunflower seeds and suet. And I'm going to tell you one of the other things that can be very beneficial besides the plants that I have mentioned. If you can plant a variety of areas like the conifers and so forth, where the birds can escape and feel like they're safe from predators, that's the main thing they're going to want. They want to know that they have a place to find shelter. One of the things that I have found in my backyard, the hawk has gotten very smart. He realizes I have a 12-foot high by 20-foot long window, which looks like an escape route for the birds. And so he would start chasing the birds, drive them to where they would hit the window, fall to the ground. He'd swoop down and pick them up. We finally had to put all kinds of like little decals or things up around there until we deterred them from that habit. He no longer is doing it, but it was something that we had to take some ways that we prevented that from happening so often until we could break the cycle going there. So keep that in mind. As our birds are in the bird feeders, if I even look out the windows at them a certain way, they will suddenly turn and flee to our Canadian hemlocks and some of the other things that they can hide at. As soon as they think I'm not looking, they come right back again. It's interesting how they can sense when you are looking at them. So they just need to have some shelter where they feel safe. And that's all the information I have for you today. I have a couple more slides that have your sources of information. If you want to put the next slide up for us. And then we're open for questions.
We have a question. How do you deter squirrels?
That's a good question. I had to go to the bird feeders that are tubes with a spring-loaded cage. They're put out by, let me think, Wild Birds Unlimited is where I got mine. I've used them for years because I could not keep them out of my other bird feeders. They were so voracious. They were chewing holes through it, making larger holes. These are like a tube, and it has a spring-loaded cage around the outside of it. So when they jump up and stand on it, it drops it down and it covers up the portholes where they can get out of. So that helps quite a bit. I got to where I even had to wire my suet cages to the shepherd's hook that I have them on, because they got to where they figured out how to even take the cage off of the shepherd's hook, and they would run away not only with the suet cage, but with the, not only with the suet, but the suet cage as well. So they can be rather tricky. And if you have a lot of trees, such as I have, there is no way that I can get my bird feeder far enough away from a tree that they can't jump onto it. I've tried squirrel baffles. I've tried all kinds of things where they can't get up the pole. And if you don't have something they can jump that far, you could put a squirrel baffle around the pole. But my trees are all, I have so many in my yard that they can jump from there across and land on top of the shepherd's hook. And just, they don't even need to be deterred by the baffle.
We have another question. Do you know of a place to get no waste seed for a good price?
No, I've shopped a number of different places for it. The main thing that I would tell you when you're working on it is don't buy your thistle seed in a very large bulk. Thistle seed will, it rots or gets rancid tasting very quickly. I have bought thistle seed, and I don't want to name a grocery store, but I bought it at a grocery store and the birds would never eat it. It evidently had sat on the shelf for too long. I have not had any problem buying no waste at, say, Meyer or something like that. I've also gone to Wild Birds Unlimited and so forth. Find out where your sales are. Same thing when you're buying your suet cakes. A lot of times they go on sale in bulk if you buy a case of them, whatever, at a time. And I find in the middle of winter, I go through about a suet cake a day. I do have a lot of birds and they do like their suet.
Is any type of suet better than others?
I haven't seen that they have been more particular of one over the other. I tend to get ones that are fairly fatty and have some interesting nuts or seeds or something like that in it, just because of the birds that I'm trying to attract. But I haven't seen a single suet that I've bought in the suet cakes that they haven't eaten. And then, do you all know how to make hummingbird nectar? We did not talk about this. When you get to the spring and we are getting the hummingbirds that are coming back up from Mexico, hummingbirds do migrate to Mexico for the winter, which I find it incredible. Those tiny, tiny, tiny little birds fly solo to Mexico. They do not fly in a flock, which I find that incredible. You can make your own nectar. You do 1 part sugar to 4 parts of water, boil it until it's all dissolved, and then let it cool and put it in your feeder. Change it every few days so that, particularly if it's hot during the summer, you'll have to change it out. so that it doesn't get moldy on you. That's the important thing. Keep that scrubbed really well. But they need that nutrient to be able to have the energy to fly because they go a long way on their own. But that's very good. You do not need to have any red dye or anything like that that's unnatural in it to attract them. If you plant some colorful flowers near it, or if you put like a ribbon or something near it to attract them. Also, she didn't talk about that at all. I didn't realize it until I was thinking about it just now. One of the things that I plant in my yard a lot for attracting the hummingbirds is black and blue salvia. It's an annual plant. You can get it. It's very long stems with arching purpley blue flowers on it. They absolutely adore it. They're on it all the time. They have a tubular shaped flower and they come and put their beaks in it. And I will see 2 or 3 of them out there at almost every given evening working at it. Another thing that they're very attracted to would be lantana. I've had very good success with them coming to lantana. That's another one that I like to plant in there for the hummingbirds. Again, I'm a big proponent of putting decorative planters out for the winter, not only to make it look pretty, but I do find it has attracted an awful lot of birds to my yard. They tend to like having that shelter that comes up into the planters. And I've had small planters, I've had big planters. The large ones that I put on my front porch, I have sawed off river birch poles that are in it, and then I tuck all kinds of greenery in it to give it some more height and interest. I've taken regular twigs from the yard, and depending on the year, what I've done, I've either sprayed them with a silver paint or sprayed them with a deep red paint, kind of like a red twig dogwood, because my red twig dogwoods aren't always as red as I'd like them to be. Then I put some very large sugar pine cones in them and tuck a few different kinds of evergreens in there, and they look good all winter long, and it will give a shelter for a lot of the birds. Also, be very reluctant to cut down a lot of your plants this fall. I know a lot of people like to cut everything to the ground and they make it look very neat and tidy. If you will leave a lot of your plants up, the ones that are, say, for example, the black-eyed Susans, some of the other ones that have the seed heads on them, when the snow and everything lands on them, they look really pretty out there. And sometimes the birds will come and perch on those as well. And it'll just give you some winter interest. You can always clean them up in the spring. They cut down very easily.
We have another comment in chat. Lots of good information today. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Like I said, we love the birds, and this is what has helped pollinating different things around our area. And so they benefit us and we benefit them. And if we can all work in conjunction together, we can keep a beautiful environment for us all to live in.